Hi, welcome back to the Wellbeing Show here in, well, it has been sunny London today. It's been fantastic. So, and James, my sound guy, was telling me I look like I've caught the sun. He's saying I'm looking Mediterranean, which is very good for this broken old Irishman. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. We've got a great show tonight with Miranda Levy, who I shall introduce you all to very shortly and get on with the show. But just before we start, just to remind you, this is a live show. It'd be lovely to have your comments and thoughts. If you want to send them in, you can sort of send them to my phone or give me a call, 07506 319 745, or reach us through one of the platforms that we're streaming on. So that's YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope. So my team are just checking out your comments and stuff like that, and hopefully they'll send them through to me. I'm sort of that's it. It's great to hear from you. Good to be back. And hi, Miranda, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. I'm fine.
It's really, really, really good to have you with us. Thanks for joining us this evening. Miranda is a journalist, features writer, but also journalist now, more as well as sort of more current affairs. But you've got a long history in features writing and magazine writing, and an author as well. And here to tell us about some of her work, but also her experiences in recovery from having had a very severe bout of sleeplessness brought on by the inappropriate use of medication, which we will get into. But first, I guess it was an amazing day yesterday, amazing news that yesterday was the first day there were no recorded deaths from COVID in the UK. I actually was genuinely happy yesterday with that news. So it's a really extraordinary step. And just thinking back to June last year, it's difficult. I sort of remember, and I certainly wasn't hopeful. June last year, it was I had lots of mixed, difficult feelings, but now I feel very hopeful. We seem to be definitely on the way out of this pandemic. How has it been for you for this last year? What sort of?
Well, it's compared with the 8.5 years up to 2018. I actually fared really well. I found communal isolation much easier than individual isolation. Now, I'm really lucky. I have to preface this that I've got a nice place to live. I've had work. None of my immediate family and friends have been ill or God help us died. So I've been fortunate, and I've actually had quite an optimistic attitude. I also, since January, I've been volunteering at a vaccination clinic. So that's a good feeling, kind of actively joining the war effort.
Yeah. So you're living with close family at the moment. You have been living.
Yeah, I'm living at my dad's place because of what I've been through, which we'll come on to. And also I'm just about to get divorced, so then I'll have money to buy my own place again.
Great. And the divorce is part of the conversation as well. So we shall get on to that. But you have a sort of, just setting the scene, I guess, a bit. You've been a very successful career woman for many years, sort of working in the media as a features writer. So tell me about that. How did you sort of get involved in all of that? So it's quite a sort of challenging world to be in some ways, I think.
Yes, a fun one as well, but you have to have certain mix of qualities. I don't know how far back you want to go, but I was good at writing. I actually started off studying law, which I didn't enjoy. So I changed to study English, and then I had a good feeling I wanted to be a journalist. I didn't know what kind of journalist, but I finished my English degree. Then I did a postgrad in periodical magazine journalism, which kind of channeled me. I started in women's magazines, which actually I enjoyed very much.
Yeah. And so sort of, how long ago was this? This is sort of, what sort of period are we talking about?
Sorry, say that again. Sorry.
How long ago was this? What sort of period are
Oh,
we
well, I
talking?
graduated. Oh God, I graduated in 91. Finished my postgrad in 92. So I've been working, obviously, apart from this 8-year period, I've been working ever since. I wasn't only a writer. I've been an editor. In fact, probably more of my career, I've been an editor actually. Um, Features editor, and then editor of Mother and Baby magazine. And then, I had periods of freelance when my kids were small, and I'm now a freelance writer and an author now. This is my second book.
Great. And we'll talk about your books later and where people can get hold of them. Because you've got the book launch of the second one coming up relatively soon, haven't you?
Insomnia Diaries. Yes, it's out. It's out on the 10th. It's out a week tomorrow.
Brilliant. Well, that's amazing. And it's interesting. I suppose I wanted to set the scene because we're going to be talking a little about your struggles around mental health and your experience in mental health services. And but it's important, I think, to set the scene sort of about you come from a very successful background, not sort of overly work driven, but it was very supportive, I think, as well. The sort of the world that you worked in terms of, because we were talking about the Japanese woman lady who's a tennis star.
Oh yeah.
And when we were talking on the phone, you said it's odd because when I talk to people about my mental health issues, I got a lot of support.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean. I mean, I had some minor wobbles, I suppose, in my 20s and 30s, and it was different then. And I didn't talk about them that much. But since this big period, I worked in women's magazines. I mean, so it's quite an open-minded society, for want of a better word. But obviously when I was younger, my mother had mental health problems. So it was when I was a teenager, it was like a big stigma. We don't talk about that. So it's a very, very different world to how it was in the 80s. Very different.
Yeah. But you come from relatively happy background. You're a stable, successful.
A kind of neurotic Jewish background, but my dad was a dentist.
That's all normal stuff, neurosis.
What's normal, but it's a kind of generous, fun, warm, slightly, hysterical background, as many Jewish families are. But very, very, very supportive. I've got a younger brother who's a consultant endocrinologist. He's an associate professor, so very successful. So it was, we were supported, and it was almost not going to university wasn't a choice, which you could argue was a double-edged sword. But I was liked learning, working. I was quite conscientious. My brother too. So I've been very lucky. I mean, the word is overused, but I was privileged, I think.
Well, yeah, that's sort of nice to hear. It's good to hear. And you're a mum yourself as well?
Yeah, I've got 2 kids. I've got an 18-year-old about to go to university and a 16-year-old.
Challenging times for them. I mean, it's not been fun being that sort of age the last year, I think. So
no, but thank God they didn't start university. That would have been much worse. I think, college. Yeah,
that would have been so unfair to miss out on your Freshers' Week. I really felt.
Yeah. But my daughter didn't celebrate her 18th. So they have missed milestones, really. But I've tried to give them perspective. That's what I'm trying to do. So
yeah. And again, the image we're getting, which I think is an appropriate image, is of an intelligent, stable, sensitive woman who's successful, does all the right things in life, etc. It's not that you didn't come from a very scarring background. We all carry our stuff about our parents and all.
Well, there's some things that really weren't perfect, but I suppose the basics were certainly there.
Enough love.
Yeah, for sure. I don't. Yes, absolutely.
And clothes and all that sort of stuff. So
yes, I mean,
but I mean also the the vulnerability of having a parent who had vulnerabilities.
That was quite that had quite a big effect on my brother and I. But
I mean, often I think children in those circumstances often I think can get into a slightly caring role, which can be a challenge.
Do you know what? I'm not sure. I sort of wanted a. I need to think about that. Maybe, yeah, maybe.
It would be relatively common, sort of, to be in that sort of. But I guess it's quite confusing when you're very young about what all that stuff is, and it's sort of we only know those things, I think, in hindsight. They're sort of
possibly
meaning of them are, but no active abuse or neglect or any of those things.
No. I mean, I don't mean to say it like that, but fortunately not. Fortunately not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess sort of what I'm interested in, I suppose, is sort of looking at these issues and sort of people being aware that life happens to us and it can be challenging.
That's for sure.
Right, and it can challenge our resilience, even the best of us. This is what happened to you. You were going along in your life and things were okay and pretty good, I'm sure, in some areas. And then you had a shocking event. Which led to a period of distress for you, which in some ways I think from your description wasn't handled brilliantly.
No, that's an understatement. If we're talking about the medical services, that's the understatement of the century.
I was quite surprised when you described, I mean, I was quite taken aback when you told me what happened. I was like, I hadn't thought, psychiatrists were still doing that.
Well, it depends. I mean, I don't know how much of the story you want me to tell.
You tell me what did happen. You were a successful woman, career woman, mother, wife. Everything seemed to be going along, and then.
Right. So I was in my early 40s. I was 42. I was working as a magazine editor. I'd been with my husband. How long have we been married? I think since 2001, and we were together since 97. So it was, 2010 this was. Our marriage wasn't going great, to be honest. We had our children quite close together, 20 months, and that's tiring. We both had full-on jobs. Yeah. And things had just started to fracture a bit. He was quite distant, things weren't great. But then I found out, and as I've said to you before, I don't want to go into too many details on this, but I found out that he wanted to call time on our marriage. He wanted to end our marriage and wasn't interested in trying to fix it. And I found this out quite suddenly, and I stopped being able to sleep. Literally within the first night, I think I slept 2.5 hours, the next night, half an hour, and then that's it. I stopped sleeping.
Yeah. I mean, and that was because of the anxiety and fear of the situation?
I mean, it was a shock. To begin with, because it came not out of the blue, but it was a sudden exposition, if that's the word. And then, yes, I was worried. I mean, everything's going through my head. I'm going to be a single mum. How am I going to cope? If you're married, it's your foundation. It's your social life. It's your part of your identity, isn't it? It's your for me anyway. I mean, I'm quite a different person now, but I to use the word resilience, I was really resilient in some ways, professionally and socially, but I learned some lessons eventually. But I had a shock, and then I was like, I have to keep sleeping, because I had brief periods of insomnia before, one quite protracted actually. And, looking back, I possibly, piled extra pressure and anxiety on myself because I thought I had to sleep. But then, as you've just been implying, within 2 or 3 days, I went to see my GP. I actually asked for sleeping pills. He put me on them without even looking up, which you could argue wasn't terrible, but it was really what happened after that, in the months after that really set the scene for a disastrous 8 years or so.
Yeah. So you go see your GP wanting some help. Just you present with sleep. I presume you told your GP what was going on.
Briefly. I mean, you don't have long, do you? But I said I'd had some bad personal news. I haven't slept all weekend. Can you give me some? I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but can you give me something to help? And, he didn't even look up. He wrote his prescription, and off you go. Here's 2 weeks temazepam, which is a benzodiazepine,
It's a very
hypnotic.
serious drug. It's a
Pardon?
very Diazepam is a very serious drug. All the PAMs.
Oh yeah, I know.
Very serious drugs.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I'm aware.
let's, if you don't mind, I don't want to sort of upset you or bring back negative memories, but I think it's maybe worth dwelling upon that, because if somebody comes to me as a mental health professional, somebody comes to me and says, look, I can't sleep at the moment because this is what's happened to me, and they give me your story, I'll be saying, well, I totally understand why you can't sleep at the moment, but
yeah,
you know what, that's probably going to be like that for a while, and that's an understandable reaction to the shock that you're experiencing.
yes,
let's look at what support we can give you. I know you're worried about not sleeping, but don't try not to worry about it. We can help you get back into sleep, and we'll look at some healthy ways of doing that. That would be what I would do. I mean, I wouldn't dream of going towards Valium-based drug, which is what the PAMs are. They're in the Valium.
yeah, no.
So they just went, they did not pass go, they did not collect £200, they just went straight to jail with you. I find that absolutely bizarre. But do you know what?
It's very common at primary care level. It's very common.
I'm
not the only one. Yeah.
Very common for women at primary care level.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
So the figures are very clear. Women, when they go and see a doctor with a mental health issue, are far more likely to just be given a prescription for medication than they are for the GP to follow the national guidelines, which they don't give, but give a referral into primary care psychological therapy.
If you don't mind me asking, what happens to men in my position? Or do they not go to their doctors with something like that?
No, they don't go. What happens is, what we see, women have a preponderance of much more of the common mental health problems, so anxiety and depression. Men tend to wait until it's become much more severe. And so you see men at the other end of the spectrum in terms of mental health issues. So they're developing psychotic splitting and so
That's interesting. And presumably using substances more. I mean, I'm just guessing here.
Alcoholism and drug misuse, and men sort of leave it till they're very, quite suicidal, quite disconnected, and also you tend to see men will, not all men, but it tends to be, in terms of gender differences, men will act out on their distress through drinking, and then maybe fighting and things like that. So,
I can see that. That makes sense.
Yeah, but it's interesting. So, it's an issue that women tend to be given, and have always been given, some sort of medication. Now, we must make a distinction between the various bits of medication. So, for people who don't understand, but if you don't mind me just explaining very briefly. So, a benzodiazepine, a PAM, a Valium, diazepam, all of this family of drugs are sort of central nervous system depressants. And so they're really, really helpful if you're freaked out for a short period of time, you can't cope, and you're panicking, you can't manage, you're having a panic attack, or you're sort of reaching a point where you're having maybe seeing things that aren't there because you're so afraid and all that sort of stuff. So they're very good at calming people down, and that's their job. But they're really for short-term use in sort of extreme circumstances. And the reason being, and this is what we're going to talk about now, is because if you use them past a few weeks or months, you very quickly build up a dependency on them.
Yeah, you do very quickly. I think the NICE guidelines are now intermittently for no more than 2 weeks. I think when I was put on them, it was intermittently for no more than 4 weeks. But I was on them for 8 years, like at least 4 or 5 years, and other drugs were added in later. Antipsychotics, gabapentinoids, antidepressants. I call it my psychiatric safari. Yeah, it's unbelievable what I was put through chemically.
Yeah. But that's where the problem started, was that point at which, rather than sitting down with you and if you what we call normalize your experience.
No, I totally.
That's absolutely understandable. You're going through this.
Yeah, it's absolutely what should have happened. It's absolutely what should have happened. Yes, I wish it had. It had.
And it should not have been labelled as a mental illness. What was happening for you was a perfectly understandable reaction to a very shocking event.
Yeah.
You know, and lots of people will identify with it, particularly from this year, I think, because maybe a lot of people who didn't empathise so much with people with mental health distress, psychological distress, whichever word you want to use, now have experienced that distress themselves because life became tough. Not for you, because you were smart about it and you made sure you were okay.
It wasn't perfect. God knows, but I'd had form. I'd had practice.
But that's the point, isn't it? You knew, you knew this, so you started looking. Right, which people who like me and you who have form with psychological distress went, oh, this is going to be tough. I think I better just do a lot of self-care and look after myself. So
yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true.
Yeah. We saw the warning signs and got on with it. So but it's interesting. Let's sort of roll back. So the GP says, all right, here's the meds. No warning with that saying, and then what was the next thing that happened? So the
next thing that happened was I went to work. I was in some mad daze. I mean, I felt quite bad very quickly. If anyone who's had sleep deprivation knows, it doesn't take long before you just, I can't even think of it, you're just totally zombified, can't concentrate, you're just like underwater, aren't you? So I think the first night I took 10 milligrams of temazepam. It didn't work at all. So I think then the next night I think I maybe took another one, didn't work. So then I think I took 2 and that didn't work. So I was at work and I was a leader, I was a manager, I was a boss, I was of a team of 12, and very quickly I couldn't concentrate. I kept rushing off to the loo. I kind of had this sense of foreboding that something terrible was going to happen and this was going to be awful, even just a few days in. I couldn't concentrate. I was rushing about. And then I think after then I tried to go on holiday with my family, which was a disaster given that, my marriage had been declared over. We still went on a holiday, which was terrible. And I came back, and I think after 2 weeks I was signed off sick because I got on very well with my boss, and I told her what was going on, and she could see that I was in a bad way. And she said, maybe you should take some time off, sort this out, because I wanted to, decide what to do with my ex-husband. And I took time off, and that's what happened. I was on sick leave after 2 weeks, something like that.
And how long were you off for?
10 years. No, I mean,
Miranda, it's jaw-dropping. Okay.
Yeah. 8.5 years. 8.5. Yeah. No, I tried to go back in. We arranged for me to try and go back in the October. And by then I had been to see a psychiatrist, and I was on a lot more drugs by then. And I couldn't manage, and then I was
just give me a moment. I'm just got to go find a wall and bang my head against it. I'm so frustrated about what happened to you. Everything that is wrong and could go wrong did go wrong with you. It's extraordinary, this sort of litany of problems. So the medication didn't work because it doesn't do that sort of stuff. That's not what it's designed for. Okay, it's not designed to help you cope with life. Sort of practical, emotional, rational, psychological support and tools. It's not really designed. It's designed to knock you out.
Well, the thing is, it didn't even do that. That was what was so awful, because if I had got 4 or 5 hours sleep a night, I might have been able to cope. Now, obviously, benzos long term are terrible, but they didn't even do that.
But to be honest, Miranda, even when a Valium type drug gives you sleep, which it's not designed as a sleeping drug, it's absolutely not. It's designed to stop you your nervous system overreacting. So it depresses your nervous system. Okay, so that you're not constantly jumping out of your skin or panicking or hyperventilating. That's what it's designed to do. Sometimes it's given to people to help them sleep, but it doesn't primarily do that. It primarily just sends you off into la land.
Well, that's certainly what happened when I got put on clonazepam, which was the real bad guy.
Yeah. for sleeplessness. It's like some Victorian horror novel about.
Oh, it got worse. I saw some horrors, let me tell you.
I'm sure. So you get given the wrong sort of support initially, or a lack of support. And to say it was 10 years ago isn't any sort of excuse, because sort of IAPT, which is the primary care psychological therapist, has been going for longer than 10 years. So
yeah, but you know, I have my own views about that when that came along later. But
yeah,
yeah.
Choice between Valium or that, which would you go for, right?
Well, it was pretty hopeless between you and me. But obviously I would rather have not been put on the drugs. But I mean, would you know, even now, if you had one appointment with a GP, would you be given psychological therapy now? I mean, I'm interested to know. It's not an open question.
You should be. These days, when they do the GAD and the PHQ forms, they fill those forms in with you. In their drop-down menu on the computer, it should be directing them to the NICE guidelines, which say that you only should get medication if you go above a certain score with your anxiety and depression.
Right.
Anyway,
none of that happened. Yeah.
And the first prescription would be psychological therapies, and then you would get medication to support the psychological therapies in happening. Because obviously some people have symptoms that are overwhelming, and if they're overwhelmed with the symptoms, they can't do the work that you're going to ask them to do.
No, that's true, because I tried a few times to do CBT and things like that, and it was just like, you know, I couldn't even engage with anything, you know.
No, I mean, if you've got the level of cognitive distortion you were describing,
yeah, I couldn't even, you know, I couldn't even read, you know, I couldn't. Yes. Yeah.
And those are sort of common cognitive distortions. But there are other approaches that they could have tried as well, which would have helped. But essentially, you needed support in managing what was going on for you. And not in sort of being turned into
a Valium. I wrote a piece for the Sun a while ago, and the headline was Valium Zombie, which at the time I was a bit offended by, but actually I thought, yeah, that was accurate.
But that's exactly what it does. I mean, there used to be a form of Valium. There used to be a form of Valium.
I was on. Yeah, I was put when I tried to come off later. We tried the Ashton Manual protocol with a psychiatrist, and I did switch to Valium to try and taper. So in fact, Valium was in the end the one I had the real problems, because that was the one that I withdrew from very quickly, and that made things even worse. Like, you know, I had a withdrawal syndrome, but that was 4 years later. That was 4 years later.
Not only you, I'm telling you, anybody in long-term use and that stuff has withdrawal symptoms. So
yeah.
They're horrific.
It's horrible. People just, we can't shout about this enough.
No.
About
sort of the people that I have endless amount of sympathy for in addiction treatment centres are the people who are on prescribed medication and are hooked on these PAMs.
Well,
they have much more difficult time than anybody else I've ever come across.
Yeah, and I've got a lot to say on that, actually, if and when you want to come to that.
Well, let's talk about that. You went to, so very briefly, we'll jump around in the conversation. It's fine. It doesn't need to be a standard beginning, middle, end narrative. It's fine. Let's just follow this. So you, at some point, you got sent to addiction treatment, didn't you?
I chose to go. So it was, how many years? It was sort of autumn 2014. So I wasn't sleeping. I was on the equivalent of 50 milligrams of Valium by then, diazepam. That's a lot. And I thought, then I knew, I mean, I was a journalist.
Let's just put that in context. Most people, if you go to see your GP and they give you some Valium type, a diazepam or something like that, you'll be on 2 mils.
Yeah, I know.
That's you're on 50. So
50. That was when the clonazepam was, you know, equivalent, whatever the word is, switched over. It's outrageous. And like I said to you when I spoke to you the other day, you know, I decided to, I didn't know what to do. I tried to call all these kind of benzodiazepine, that's the group of drugs, helplines, and nobody called you back. There's no help. And this is something I talk about very vocally. There's no help for people that put on these drugs. So I took myself off. Yes, I took myself off to the addictions service at the local hospital. 2 floors above was the doctor who put me on this stuff. I'm seeing an addictions consultant. Yeah. So I tried to do it myself. You know, I did some reading. I looked at the, you know, these tapering, they call it tapering, coming off charts, because you can't come off suddenly because you could die, literally. You can have a seizure. So I tried to cut down myself. I couldn't do it. So after a few weeks, I said, right, I'm going to let someone do this for me. I got a bit of money saved up from my redundancy. I'm going to go to rehab. So I looked online. I didn't really know what I was doing. I called a few places, a few people said, we can't do that. That's a medical taper. That takes a long time. We don't have the staff. But quite a couple, 2 or 3 places said we can do that. One of them was not too far from London, wasn't too expensive. They said they'd have me, they could help me, so I signed up and off I went.
How did that go for you?
Terribly. It was a disaster. I think it was the worst decision I ever made.
So what happened there?
Well, okay, it runs along the 12-step model. So, you know, I understand that you have a, you know, addiction as your one of the treatments you offer. It's totally inappropriate, in my view. And in fact, I feel this terribly strongly for coming off the physical detox, as they call it, and B, I found it absolutely inappropriate for me and my problems.
It's also the time scale involved in tapering off these drugs is way beyond what you could do in a rehab.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. I'm coming off something called pregabalin, which I don't know if you know of David Healy. He's quite a famous psychopharmacologist, but he calls it Valium on steroids. So I've been coming off that for 2 years, okay? And they whipped me off Valium, halved it from 50 to 20 in about 2.5, 3 weeks, and I went doolally. I absolutely went gaga.
There's a debate in addiction treatment. I don't think it is a debate as far as I'm concerned. There's a philosophical, almost religious belief in sort of abstinence-based work, particularly
it doesn't work, not for these pills. Yeah.
And the idea of medically assisted treatment is still, for a lot of people, anathema in that field. And the problem has been in the UK, there's been a huge chasm between those that provide medically assisted and those that...
What do you mean by medically assisted? Sorry. What do you mean, like being given Librium to come off alcohol? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean being given the sort of medication you choose to have so that you don't have a shocking transition. So in your case, it will take a long time because you've been on these medications for a long time. It's going to take a long time for you to taper off slowly in a way that doesn't make you feel completely bonkers.
I felt they didn't know about it. I felt they very religiously followed the 12 steps. Yeah. You know, I was also, you know, in my field, because I've done quite a lot of research on this, people don't even like the word addiction being used. They like dependency being used because they feel that the treatment pathway is so different for, you know, a lot of people who present at substance abuse clinics. So
I think there's a very limited number of people that sort of abstinence-based approaches are designed for, and they do work for some people. I mean, I
don't doubt that for a second. I just mean for psychotropic drugs, they don't.
No, and it's also, I think there's a lot of in the 12-step treatment sector, and this, it's not me saying this. Baroness Black said this in her recent review of addiction treatment in the UK, is that there's been a dumbing down and a losing of professionalism, largely to do with an importing of this model, and sort of there's a lot of people who work in the field who have no qualifications whatsoever other than they haven't used a drug that day, and that's it. That's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't ask. I was in such a state, I didn't really ask about
Yeah,
qualifications.
I mean, I'm sure at the treatment centre you went to, people were qualified. But again, a lot of the people who are qualified in that field will have been ex-users themselves, and they're sort
They
of
all were, I think. Yeah,
emotionally committed to their treatment model because it worked for them.
exactly.
And it doesn't work for everybody. And there's also a thing about, we know from long experience that people on with opiate dependencies, and there's very big similarities between what you had and opiate dependencies like heroin use, etc. Is that, again, there's a strong case for arguing that you can't do them in any way apart from medical treatment. And for some people, they may need to be on a small level of their drug of choice for the rest of their life, and so that they can function, and that's okay.
That's interesting, isn't it?
That's
I am.
absolutely fine. There's no problem. But there is a problem philosophically with people who want to promote only an abstinence-based approach, and it's a serious issue because lives are at stake. I
did find it very inflexible, to be honest with you. I interviewed a 12-step because I interviewed lots of people for my book, and I wanted to hear from someone who is a proponent of the 12 steps and thinks it's and I interviewed somebody, and she said, you know, because there was a lot of tough love. I mean, at one point I was so quiet and they made me stand on a chair and sing God Save the Queen, you know, like to kind of tough love me. And it was so humiliating. I burst into tears. It was terrible. And she said, this should be a program that's built around kindness. And she said, you also needed a much longer detox. She said, if money was no object, you should have gone off to like a clinic in Arizona for 6 months. You know, so not only was I mean, you know, there were two issues here really. There was the physiological issue, like I was physically dependent, which they didn't seem to understand, and then obviously there was my journey, and this is not a value judgment, but it was very different from someone who's been taking cocaine for 10 years or has alcohol problems. And I'm not saying it's better or worse, I'm a better person. It was different. That's my argument about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you, and I will nail my colours to the flag. I'm in 12-step recovery for various things, and so I'm very grateful for that, but I'm very cautious about who and what it can work for. And my understanding of 12-step recovery is there's a lot of literature in there that says if a doctor says take something, take it. And so if
they were also against
professional tells you need support, then you need support. That's the way it is.
I did feel that they made me feel bad. Then they started on my antidepressants, which arguably I shouldn't have been on either.
I know, and I think it's very dangerous, that stuff. It's very dangerous.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was wondering if this is what all the treatment centres are like, because this was my one experience.
Well, I mean, I think the ones that are sort of are obsessed about 12 steps often will come out with this sort of nonsense and shouldn't be allowed to practice, as far as I'm concerned. So, like, this is a global issue at the moment. So, in California, for example, where you've got, in the US, I mean, treatment models are very, very narrowly prescribed to 12-step. Essentially, because that's where it started from, and there's a sort of philosophical, political belief in abstinence and not in harm minimization, not in medication assisted, and the evidence for medication assisted treatment of opiate based addiction is unassailable. It's absolutely unassailable. It's clear that approach saves lives. Okay, it's absolutely clear. And 80%, it was so bad, this sort of philosophical stuff, 80% of the rehabs, so-called in California, were refusing to allow medical intervention in their treatment because they had a rigid belief in abstinence.
It is rigid.
To the point where the California legislator had to pass new legislation forcing them to allow people. Now, in the US, people are mandated often by the courts to go to a treatment center. They have no choice. And it's that or go to prison. And then they're being forced to go to treatment services, which are dangerous to their health.
I think I'd rather go to prison.
You probably get better services in prison. That's the field. Now, sort of, it's as you've discovered, this whole area is a bit of a minefield. But rather than go off there, let's come back. So, how did you get from doctor, I can't sleep because I've just had a big shock, to admitting yourself into a rehab? What was the step?
I'll tell you. So
I'm literally fuming.
The thing is, I've chosen not to do that because I don't think it's very helpful. But I'm not entirely happy. Let's put it that way. But it got to the end of the summer. I still wasn't sleeping. I was in a mess. I got an NHS referral to a psychiatrist. So I pitched up at ANX Hospital, saw a very nice psychiatrist who clearly wanted to help. So I was on an antidepressant called trazodone, and he whacked that up and he put me on clonazepam, which, as you've been saying, is a bad one. It's a tranquilizer, isn't it? It's a daytime pill. Let's put it that way. And then I just went away, and and then what happened was it worked a bit, actually. I slept here and there. I felt quite fuzzy and quite nice during the day. Everything was...
Whoops. Okay, I think she's just knocked her phone over, but I'm sure Miranda will come and join us. Having said that she wasn't upset about this, or tried not to be, she clearly is, by having smashed her phone to bits. But I'm sure James is working busily to get Miranda back online with us. But I mean, I'm just going to share my shock about the sort of what is happening to Miranda in this story, and just make a point to people that, I mean, I started to talk about the difference in the different types of medications. Now, Miranda was whacked onto these sort of highly dependency forming drugs, and we need to make a distinction between that and the sort of modern antipsychotics, that modern antidepressants. Sorry, she was also put on an antipsychotic, but the antidepressants.
Sorry about that. That's never happened.
Right, no, you've just having said to me, I don't get angry about this. You suddenly went, what up?
I wouldn't say I was angry. I was animated and waving my arms around. So yes, I'm not angry. One thing I want to say is actually I'm not angry, because it doesn't serve anybody, which is a phrase I did learn in rehab. So I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I just got a little bit animated and knocked my computer over. Yeah. So I was I'm back in the room. Sorry about that, everybody. It's never happened before. So yes, I was put on this drug and I was a kind of fuzzy. It felt quite nice. But obviously, as you know, with these drugs, you become tolerant. So you need more of them to feel the same. So I rang my doctor. Oh, they're not really, I still feel terrible. So he just doubled it. Then he upped it again. I think they went up 4 times in the end. I think I saw him once every 6 weeks, 2 months. And then from memory, you know what it's like in the NHS, there was another doctor who, then there was more let's try this, let's try that, let's try this, antipsychotics, this, that, and the other. You know what it's like? It's like, I call it my psychiatric safari. It was like one thing after the other, and there was no gap between one or the other. It's like, we'll stop this and we'll start this. I'd pitch up at A&E, see another psychiatrist. Oh no, you shouldn't be taking that, you should be taking this. But the common theme was the benzos. The common theme was the clonazepam. And I just, I could.
And amongst all of this, what had happened to your life?
Well, I didn't have one. I was upstairs in the loft conversion. I was hardly able to look after my kids. I mean, as I said to you earlier, I don't really want to talk about that. And was very lucky that my soon-to-be ex, looked after the kids brilliantly. They were at a lovely school and there were grandparents around. So I was, at the beginning, I was able to take them to school and make them dinner and stuff. But I was sort of a zombie in my bedroom, occasionally watching daytime TV, Googling. I became obsessive Googler, obsessive on that.
It's a fundamental problem, though, isn't it? That you weren't being asked, how are you doing in your life? You were being asked about your symptoms.
My what? Sorry.
Symptoms. So
Well,
you were going to see these.
oh, I see. Well, okay. At one point, after about a year, I did go and see a private therapist, actually. Someone, a very lovely guy, came very well, very great guy, humanistic psychotherapist.
Yeah.
But at that point, I was beyond, he, in the end, he said, the phrase, I wasn't available. He couldn't do anything because I was on too many pills. I just wasn't there.
Let's stop and think about that, Miranda, because sort of the problem that you'd come in with a relatively, it's difficult and it's a challenge. Insomnia is difficult, as you know, because you've written a lot about it. You understand insomnia can be a vicious cycle, and it can be difficult to break. But it is a problem that we understand, and there are services and support for it which will help people.
Not really.
It's a challenge. But I would say, as a mental health practitioner, helping people with sleep hygiene is a very common thing that I do, because sleep and insomnia, sleep disturbances and insomnia are both a symptom of and a consequence of sort of mental health.
Sleep hygiene doesn't work for everybody, though. I mean, things like not drinking
doesn't work for everybody. But what I'm suggesting to you is that that's that type of approach is looking at what the problem is and trying to sort out the problem, rather than turning you into the problem that needs to be solved.
Yes, no, 100%.
Whether it's effective or not, it's going to be partially effective. All these things we keep trying, but we don't create they don't turn you into a problem. The idea is, what they do is they begin to resource you and tool you up, and some things will work and some things won't. But you went from what was a solvable problem to a person that can't even relate to a qualified professional in a clinical setting.
Yes, that's exactly what happened.
And you were a successful manager in a competitive field, right?
Yeah.
So you hadn't come from some sort of strange background where you had no skills or resources. You were skilled and resourced. You were educated to postgraduate level. You were successful professionally.
Well, then they told me I had a personality disorder. That's another thing that came up halfway through the proceedings, which that was a bit of a shock, that diagnosis. Don't worry, it's not there anymore. I got it taken off.
No, of course. I mean, they described you as having a personality disorder after they had created a mess with.
Yeah, they told me I was an addict, having made me addicted. Substance abuse. I read all about it. Let's not even go there.
It's extraordinary stuff. So you end up in this place where a qualified mental health professional finds that they can't talk to you. Because you're on such a cocktail of drugs, and the only response you're getting is try this drug instead of that drug. Right?
Yeah.
And then you get worse and worse labels and worse problems, and so the hole that you're in is getting dug deeper and deeper and deeper. This is an extraordinarily familiar story. Okay, this is exactly what used to happen in mental health services 25 years ago. So when I started in mental health services 25 years ago, I was part of a wave of clinicians that were brought in to close down large institutions that were doing. And so we moved. It was a time of community care, moving people out of hospital care, because this is literally what would happen every single time. People would go into the system, and the system would grind them up like sausage meat.
Well, I'd see people at my appointments, this has obviously been their life for a very long time on, long-term antipsychotic treatment. And, it was frightening and it was terrible.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. I think that I want to say this to anybody who's listening who does have a psychotic illness. That's very serious, and you do need to listen to your mental health practitioners. I want to say to people who do have bipolar disorder, that's very serious stuff. Okay, but somebody presenting with insomnia should not end up 10 years later in the place that you ended up, Miranda.
Yeah, and I want to, what's the word, back up what you've just said, because I know those conditions can be really serious and those drugs can be life-saving. I'm only really talking about my own experience here, so I don't mean to generalize at all.
No, absolutely, I know.
Yeah.
And so then tell us, because just I'm aware of time, I don't want to run out of this time. Tell us how you dug yourself out of that hole, Miranda. This is even more extraordinary than how you got into it in the first place.
So fast forward, I came out of rehab. I took myself off the rest of the benzos and got even worse. Eventually, a turning point, and it wasn't immediate at all, was that my father retired. So I'd been living with my ex-husband, I mean, we were still married, for 6 years, which was not a very mentally healthy place to be. I wasn't able to manage on my own. My father retired. I moved back here, where I still am, for a few more months. The benzos came out of my system. I'm convinced I had acute withdrawal syndrome, and time was a massive thing. That was the first thing. So I just started after about 2 years, and it took 2 years. I started sleeping a few minutes a night here and there. When that happened, I was able to use tactics and things like exercising, like I came, when I started working again, I found out about CBTI, cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia. I got a weighted blanket, I exercised, I ate healthily. But I think a big thing was nothing to do with me. A big thing was I'm not off all the drugs, I'm still on some, but a big thing was that the benzos, whatever the physiological term is, they came out of my system. My receptors started mending. And who knows? I mean, there's no test for these things, is there? But looking back, and with 2 years now, 2.5 years, I've been okay. Hindsight, I think that's what happened. And I'm very lucky, because it easily could have gone, I was suicidal. I took a couple of overdoses. It could easily have ended very differently for me.
Absolutely. It's with... You really have fast forwarded on that, because
I know
what a struggle it's been. If you don't mind, if us go over a little bit more detail, because it's really important for people to hear the story of recovery.
Yeah, of course.
So you realise, you come out of rehab, and I guess you realise, hang on a minute, this is wrong. Circumstances change, is what I heard. Suddenly there's a space available which is safer than where you've been living emotionally.
Yeah.
So that's a really important point, that I think people need to understand, that if the circumstances that you're in are insecure and dangerous and difficult, it's inevitable that you're going to feel distress around that.
Yeah, completely.
And having a genuinely compassionate and human insight into that, I think, is absolutely key in terms of mental health services. There's a saying, don't diagnose yourself with depression unless you've checked first that you're not surrounded by idiots.
Well, I can think of a stronger word than that, but yeah.
I've substituted it. But very much, a lot of mental illness and wellness is about the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's true. I didn't realize it as much. And in fact, as I said, it wasn't overnight. It wasn't like, oh, I'm home, daddy, I'm better. It took 2 years. It took a long time. But I think
tell us a bit more about some of that journey, if you don't mind.
Sure. So
this space opens up, and then what? What's the next?
So I've come here literally with a little overnight bag, some pajamas, and a toothbrush. I'm in the spare room here. I didn't improve for ages. I was on antipsychotics, which made me very fat. So I ate for 2 years and took pills. And I discovered Netflix. So I worked my way. I think I watched every single thing on Netflix.
We've all done that. We can all identify.
Yeah, the last year.
Through
but this was before lockdown. So I was but then what happened? So actually, in old unfashionable Essex, there was actually a better mental health team than there was in trendy North London, which is interesting. So they still tried to put me on lithium, and I said no. That was a turning point when I said no to psychiatric drug, actually. But they sent round a mental health worker, and once a week she would make me go for a walk, go to a Costa Coffee, Yeah, exactly. I hated it. I didn't want to go, but I sort of did because, you know, I'm not that, try not to be a difficult person. That
except when you're smashing your, except when you're smashing your computers on my show.
Sorry, that was an accident. I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, but but you know, again, that didn't make me feel better. It wasn't like I suddenly started sleeping, but that was a start. That was a start. I remember there's one anecdote, it's in my book actually. We go to Costa Coffee and she said, "What do you want to drink?" And I'm like, "I don't know." I said, "Oh, the old Miranda would have liked Earl Grey tea." And she said, "Well, Miranda likes Earl Grey tea." So do you see what I mean? Because I'd lost my personality. I didn't know who I was.
Absolutely.
So that things like that were turning points. Another turning point was, I don't know if you know the film The Greatest Showman, which a lot of people love. I saw that and I hated it. It was, to me, it was so cheesy and saccharine. And that was a turning point because I had an opinion again. So there were little patches, sparks of light that then got bigger and kind of joined together.
And it seems to me, I don't know if I'm making too much about this, but certainly your home environment changed to an environment which was much more loving and supportive. Not that your ex is not loving, but it's, you know, it's never going to be easy in that situation, was it? Right? So. No. So
he wasn't loving or supporting, but supportive. You know, so you're being very generous there. But you know,
no, I think what I said was it changed to one that is loving.
Yes,
your father.
Yes,
provided a loving, supportive, holding, emotionally nourishing environment in which you could be yourself, right? And then the second important thing that happened was a human being turned up on your doorstep and said, "I'm going to do stuff with you."
And also the human being let me talk. So I talked a lot about, you know, my job and my career, what I'd loved, and actually made me feel quite sad because I thought that part of my life was over, that I wasn't, I mean, how could I possibly be a journalist anymore? I can't even count to 10. Do you know what I mean? So it is actually quite amazing. I'll give myself that one, how much further how far I've come. But, you know, I remembered who I was and what I was good at and what I'd done. And even though I thought that part of me was over.
You remembered it in the way we all do, by doing that normal everyday life stuff, because that's where we exist.
I started very, very small though. I mean, the tiniest things. So, and when I did start to improve, when I started to sleep, and this is the key, you know, I will go on about this. This was the key. This is why my book's called The Insomnia Diaries. Then I was able to start putting the building blocks together to get back to where I am now.
Okay, so I want to reinforce what you're saying about the importance of sleep. So for those that don't know, sleep deprivation, if it's done by a government, is illegal. It's called torture. It's officially a form of torture. So we are not allowed to deprive people of sleep if we're a
Geneva Convention, I think. I wanted to complain to the Geneva Convention about what was going on to me.
Absolutely. And the reason for it is that sleep deprivation is absolutely deadly. It is the key way to destroy somebody's psyche is to refuse to let them sleep. And they use it, the Americans use it over in Guantanamo Bay. It's a standard thing that the first thing that'll happen to you if you're renditioned to there is that they will spend the first 2 weeks not allowing you to sleep. And it's absolutely mind-numbingly soul-destroying. And it has to be said. So I really want to reinforce that point that you're making, that getting some sleep is crucial. Now, having said that, I would say that that was probably what was motivating the doctors, because they understand that. But it just really got out of hand. And it should have been reviewed many, many years prior to that. And again, for a bit of information for people, what should have happened to you is that on all of this stuff, you should have gone through a care plan with a review, with an advocate. On that level of psychotropic intervention, you should have actually had a full-blown mental health team around you with proper reviews, looking at what was going on.
I did. I had a care coordinator, but she didn't do very much.
Unfortunately, that's a common story. But all of this Anyway, I'm not going to go back into the problem. The solution. So you find chinks in the sleeplessness. What worked for you in terms of practical, real things, in terms of helping you get a bit of sleep and a bit of relief?
Okay, so as soon as I got a couple of hours a night, I was able to do. So I got a phone. I didn't have a. I had I left a phone when I moved. I didn't have a phone. I didn't have an email address. All those things. So my dad helped. He bought me a phone, a smartphone. I was agoraphobic for 3 or 4 years. I didn't leave the house. I refused to leave the house. The mental health worker helped me leave the house. One day before I knew it, I was halfway around the block. I mean, I was hugely overweight and very out of breath. I've lost a lot of weight actually since then. Exercise, massive. Light, natural light, massive. I came off some of the drugs. I stopped taking olanzapine, which is an antipsychotic. I just unilaterally decided to do that. Stopped it, reasonably slowly, though actually my experience was it didn't have very bad withdrawal symptoms compared with the others. I know other people find that different, so I've got to be very careful about saying that. And nobody should come off anything without talking to a doctor. So then, because I started losing weight, I started watching my dad has a treadmill. I started watching the treadmill and watching comedies. I watched Flight of the Conchords. I don't know if you know Flight of the Conchords. It's a brilliant comedy. I started laughing again. I started laughing.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. You'd have been enjoying doing the exercise rather than torturing yourself because you're watching comedy. What a stroke of genius. Absolute stroke of genius.
I'll take
I'm going to steal that from you.
But the thing is, before I'd started sleeping a bit, I wasn't capable of laughing. I lost my sense of humor. I mean, I see myself as someone who has a reasonable sense of humor, but for 8 years I didn't have one. I had no sense of irony. I took everything literally.
You know the Woody Allen joke about being interviewed on German television?
No.
It wasn't Woody Allen. It was the American comedian. Who died. He had depression and addiction.
Not Robin Williams.
Robin Williams. He said, I was being interviewed on German TV and the interviewer said to me, why do you think in Germany we don't have much of a sense of humour? And he said, did you ever think it's because you killed all your comedians?
Oh, that's a good one. Ooh, Patty. Ooh. Wow. I didn't know.
I'm reaffirming the fact that I'm sure you have a fantastic sense of humor. But
what I'm saying is, that's the first thing that went almost. I see things quite lightly these days. I try not to. I mean, obviously there are serious things, but I try not to take things too seriously. I don't like people who take themselves too seriously and who are too earnest. Yes. And I feel that having that kind of lightness, and I don't know if you can. I don't know if it's because I've been through such a terrible time that, I'm easily pleased. I have low standards. But
if I could encapsulate what recovery from distress, psychological distress, looks like, it would be that I look on the bright side today and I look for what's fun and I don't look at all the shit and the horror, and that's perfect.
But when things have been so terrible, I mean, it's gratitude, isn't it? You're grateful for a cup of tea and a bath, and when I wake up every morning, I say thank you to the gods of sleep. I look at my clock. If it's more than 5 hours, I think that's all right. I've done it. Maybe I'll fall back to sleep, but I am grateful for sleeping. Most people don't even think about it.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. Having been an insomniac at various points in my life, I really treasure sleep. We have to finish there, unfortunately, Miranda. I told you that the hour would fly by.
So can we mention my book a bit?
You can mention all your books, so show us.
Okay, well, I've only done 2, and there will be a third one in the pipeline. So my first book is The Rough Guide to Babies, which probably isn't relevant, and I think it's even out of print. But the new one, here it is, The Insomnia Diaries: How I Learned to Sleep Again. This is out on Thursday, the 10th of June. You can buy it; it's online everywhere now. Amazon, Waterstones, Foyles, WH Smith, all of those. I read the audio book, which I listened to yesterday, which wasn't quite as torturous as I thought it was going to be. So there's an audio book. It's on Kindle. That's it, I think. So
Right.
briefly, what it's about is it's kind of a self-help memoir, but it's about things that didn't work as well. So it's my story. There's quite a lot of science. I've interviewed quite a lot of expert psychiatrists, good ones, enlightened ones. I go into things like the 12-step movement quite a lot, and there's some tips, as we've just been discussing.
Right. And are you, as well as the book, are you available to present to say workplaces or groups?
I would love to do that. I would love to do that.
How would people get hold of you? Do you have a website?
Yes, I have a website that's mirandalevy.co.uk.
Okay.
That's
we'll put those details
start. My contact details are on there.
Great. And you are also working as a journalist, aren't you?
Yeah, I write for national newspapers and magazines.
Fantastic. Look, Miranda, it's absolutely superb to have you on.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much. Sorry about smashing the room up.
That's fine. I'm used to talking to myself. That's the way my life
I'm really sorry. I was panicking. It went down the back of my desk. I couldn't find my camera.
That's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It's been wonderful to have you on. And
anytime, if you want me back, I've got lots of other things I could talk about.
Well, I think you've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I'd like to bring you back and sort of share more of your experience of recovering life now.
Sure.
Well. Because it's always extraordinary watching somebody come back from a very dark place and get their life back on track.
If you'd have seen me 3 or 4 years ago, you wouldn't have thought it was the same person.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think giving people hope by sharing your story is really, really important.
Yeah, that's really what I'm hoping to do here. Yeah. So.
Great. Anyway, you stay there, Miranda. I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody. Goodbye, everybody. See you all next week. I have no idea who's on because I don't read the emails that my team send to me. Sorry, team. But somebody fantastic will be on. Not me. I'm just the boring bit. Sort of. Been lovely to have you on, Miranda, and we'll get you on again. Thanks, everybody, and goodbye for now. See you all next week.